The story I'm about to tell you is true. Perhaps the most intriguing part of this story is that every single person watching this video, every single one of you, was alive when the story became news in 2004. And the fact that it is so intriguing is because everyone watching this video has either never heard of this story or forgot about it. I'm betting on the first one, that you never heard of it, because it is truly unforgettable. God bless all the victims and the family members and anybody that had to go through and deal with any of these people. Furthermore, once you hear this story in its entirety that I'm getting ready to tell you, I can promise it'll be seared into your memory forever. Enter our main character, a fellow by the name of Mark Dutroux. He was born in Belgium in 1956. He was twice convicted of kidnapping and raping underage children. The first time was in 1989. The second time occurred in 1996. And yes, you heard me right. You heard me correctly. He was convicted and served a much too brief sentence back in 1998. He actually only served about 3.5 years of his 13-year sentence because he was released for good behavior. There was no children in the prison. And then less than 10 years later, he was arrested again on the exact same charges, different victims. Now, in the second round of charges that he caught, he was convicted of kidnapping, torturing, and abusing victims, some of them to the point of death. What I'm about to tell you comes from statements made by his surviving victims, called the X-Files, and some of it from Mark Dutroux himself, and evidence from law enforcement. I've also added references and citations at the very bottom of this video in the description box. And here we go, down the rabbit hole. Mark confessed to kidnapping, raping, drugging, torturing, and filming children for many, many, many years. He had also claimed he was doing it at the behest of a political elite who financed his career as a professional trafficker. I'm going to make some connections for you here. This is how we do it. Now, not only did this political elite finance his efforts, they made specific requests of him. Sometimes they requested specific types of children. They were called party favors, and he was asked to deliver kids of certain age, sex, and races. Sometimes they requested specific means of torturing the children to fulfill their desires, orgies, satanic rituals involving sacrifices, and torture, games, offerings. Hopefully I'm painting the picture for you here clearly enough. And sometimes they requested he film certain influential people engaged in these acts for later use as blackmail. Now, Mark claimed many of his customers and financiers were world leaders. This was not a stretch of the imagination because he lived in Belgium. where the EU and NATO headquarters were located. This statement was also corroborated by victims who were able to identify specific, very specific politicians. We see all of you. We have it all. It's just a matter of getting it all out to the public. Anneke Lucas was one of his victims who testified against him. She claimed when she was 6 years old that the cleaning lady hired by her mother sold her to the pedophile network in 1969. Her claims were very extraordinary. She was raped over 1,700 hours before turning 12 years old. She was 6 years old when she was forced to participate in her first orgy, which included wearing an iron dog collar and eating human excrement. She would eventually and actually be delivered back to her parents from time to time. However, her parents themselves were complicit in the crimes and always sent her back to the abusers. I know this is horrible, just please bear with me. For the victims, please pray for the victims. Torture, including being strapped to a butcher's block used to execute other children. Other victims were forced to torture her for hours as part of their initiation. She was considered very attractive, and that made her preferred by her abusers. She claimed that she tried to use that for her survival, an advantage to the best of her ability. But by the age of 11, she had become so broken that she was slated to be executed and disposed of like trash. Now, she went on to say that she was saved one day when her abuser negotiated for her freedom. That abuser would later sit as a defendant in her trial. Then other witnesses and victims would soon come forward, describing such things as black masses with child and adult sacrifices taking place in front of observers and participants, which included prominent politicians and figureheads around the world. This would be corroborated by a note found by the police at the house belonging to Bernard Weinstein, a man who previously worked with Detroit and who became Mark Detroit's had murdered. Previously who worked with Mark, but whom Mark later had murdered. The letter contained very specific requests for certain types of victims, for different satanic sacrifices, for different offerings. This stuff does exist. The letter was signed by a man who called himself Anubis. It turned out Anubis was a high priest of a satanic cult called the Abrasax, whose real name was Francis Desmet. Police obtained a warrant and seized computers, documents, mail, actual human skulls, jars of blood, and all sorts of satanic items. But none of this was enough to make an arrest. As the Mark Detroit's trial went public, other victims kept coming and stepped forward and confirmed the testimony, each of them offering up descriptions of sexual abuse and human sacrifice that all worked and went in line with each other. And here where it gets a little bit more disturbing. They also described hunting parties where the elites would release naked children into the woods to hide, so that the elites themselves could hunt them down and slaughter them. Many of the stories and victims contained so many different similarities, they were impossible to deny. For example, The hunting parties were often held at castles where the victims could not escape and were hidden from the public eye. Those not killed in the hunt were usually chased down and mauled and killed by Dobermans. All of these victims echoed the testimonies of other older survivors of the ritual satanic ninth circle hell ring abuse from around the world. It is also notable that Mark Detroit owned 10 homes valued at about $6 million at the time of this. It is also notable that Mark was not employed. It was also notable that Mark received $1,200 per month in public assistance. It is also notable that documents released by WikiLeaks show large sums of money in various currencies were deposited into his wife's bank account. It is also notable that those deposits coincided with reported kidnappings and missing children reports. It is also notable that before his removal, Judge Jean Marc Corneret was on the verge of publicly disclosing the names of high-level government officials who had been recognized on videotapes of sexual torture that took place at Mark Detroit's dungeon. It is also notable that 20 potential witnesses for this case have died without explanation. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Have you connected the dots? Are there any headlines today that sound like history is repeating itself? This is in another country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, not one single thing in this video is theory. It has all been proven, and it is all on the record. You see these pictures here on the screen? Those are images of the hunting games. They're paintings that people like Tony Podesta buy and hang in his home and invite others over to enjoy while they sip on their 200-year-old brandy. We all know Epstein was a sick SOB who had friends in high places, the same friends that hung out with Tony Podesta. You think Epstein was the only one all by himself, that somehow he was a unique individual? Or was he the low-level one that they were willing to sacrifice, offer up, to protect everyone else involved at a much higher level? Do you realize now that when it comes to trafficking, Satanism, pedophilia, human sacrifice, organ harvesting, adrenochrome, that is an art imitating life? That these people who are so obsessed with the art that glorifies these things might actually themselves be engaged in these kinds of things? Do you think normal, non-pedo, non-cannibal, average Joes would hang out with that kind of garbage up in their homes or hang pictures like that? And suddenly, after years of talking about this, the claims that world leaders and governments around the world and prominent movie stars, they said, follow the stars, that them being involved in this satanic horror show isn't so far-fetched after all. Suddenly, it's not so crazy to say that the world agencies who claim to stop these crimes, WHO, the UN, are actually, some of them are got small facets that cover up the real work of procuring and enabling, yes, and even participating in these actual crimes against humanity. Suddenly the whole house of cards comes crashing down. With this one case, all of the unbelievers are silenced. For crying out loud, this trial was done back in 2004. Do you remember it? If not, do you wonder why it was not on the front page of all the newspapers across the world? And if you're asking yourself, how do these people get away with this? Have you not figured it out yet? That the very people who are supposed to end it are doing it? By this point, most of everyone has watched at least an Epstein documentary off of Netflix. I think there have been 3 or 4 more made since his death, supposedly. And the one thing I've heard people say over and over and over again was, where is Epstein's girlfriend? And why hasn't she been arrested yet? Did anyone asking that question even try to find that answer out like we did? Or did you just shrug your shoulders like every other time and say, well, it is what it is and there's nothing I can do about it, and then go on with your next little fairy tale? And this is the reason I'm here, and I've been here, so let me help you out again. Did you hear the news story from about 2 weeks ago that President Trump fired federal prosecutor Jeffrey Bremen? He was the prosecutor in charge of the Epstein case. You heard me right. Trump ordered the firing of prosecutor Jeffrey Bremen to bar. Peekaboo, we see you. Now hit the road, Jack. Attorney General Barr requested that Bremen step down. Bremen refused, so Trump fired him, and Bremen was replaced with prosecutor Audrey Strauss. And then suddenly, bam, Maxwell is in custody. And now we all get a front row seat for the horror show that is about to come out. You will not believe who is involved and how deep the rabbit hole really goes. And you will not believe the length that they go through in order to protect these deep, dark, vile secrets.
Take it all. You want it all.
Very soon, terrible news will spread. It'll seem impossible to believe. Horrible, sickening, unbelievable things that will shake your world and may turn everything you've ever believed in upside down. People you know will be accused of the unbelievable, monstrous things. This could be, and most likely will be, people in Hollywood, politics, journalists, pop stars, charities, religious leaders, institutions, heads of states, certain police officers, etc., so on and so forth. We want you to know that good people have been fighting a silent battle behind the scenes in order to save the world from the terrible horrors. It was a lonely war. It was a silent war. Chances are you did not even notice it, but you will soon. That's why we are here, warning you, and why you must hear us out. We're just a bunch of anonymous people from around the world. We didn't want money. We didn't want fame. We just couldn't sit and watch the world burn and do nothing about it.
Bill Barr is following the law, and what's his reward? Democrats are going to hold him in contempt.
Sold us out for $1. Be prepared for what you will find. Some truths are hard to swallow. Remember, inform your friends and family. Stay calm and inform yourself. We are the truth. We are the news. Again, I am Michael. This is the Patriot Hour. God bless, Godspeed to each and every one of you. And where we go one, we go all.
You don't know what's in store, but you know what you're here for. Close your eyes.